Deep in the rainforests of Central America, hidden beneath 1,000 years of tangled green, there rise great pyramids of pale stone, temples taller than the treetops, crowning cities that once held hundreds of thousands of people. Here lived a people who charted the movements of the stars, who invented one of the only true written languages ever created in all the Americas, and who devised a calendar so precise and a mathematics so advanced that they had a symbol for zero long before most of the world. And then, at the height of their glory, they walked away and let the jungle swallow it all. When Europeans first pushed into these forests, centuries later, they found the great stone cities already silent, the plazas empty, the palaces roofless, the towering temples wrapped in strangling roots and vine, home now only to the howler monkey and the jaguar. The people who built them were long gone from these places. And the deepest question, why a flourishing civilization would abandon its magnificent cities and vanish back into the forest, is one that scholars argue over to this very day. Good evening and welcome. Tonight, let me take you gently into that lost green world, into the rainforest kingdoms of the ancient Maya, one of the most brilliant and mysterious civilizations the world has ever known. Come with me, slowly beneath the canopy, and back across 1,000 years, to the age when these silent cities were alive with color and noise and light. Picture the rainforest at dawn, the mist lying in the low places, the calls of unseen birds, the vast green canopy stretching unbroken to every horizon. And then, rising above that green sea, catching the first pink light of morning, the gray stone comb of a great temple, impossibly tall and steep, built by human hands in a place with no metal tools, no wheels, and no beasts of burden to carry the stone. For that is part of the wonder of the Maya. They raised their soaring pyramids and their sprawling stone cities without iron, without the wheel, without horse or ox, with nothing but stone tools and rope and rafts, and the patient muscle of a great many people. And upon those buildings, and on tall carved stone monuments, they left a written history of their kings and their wars and their gods, a history we can now, at last, begin to read. Tonight we will walk through all of it slowly, from the very beginning to the very end. We will climb the great pyramids of Tikal, rising out of the jungle of what is now Guatemala. We will stand in painted palaces, and sit in the vast plazas where the god-kings appeared before their people in robes of jade and brilliant feathers. We will learn to see the beautiful, intricate glyphs of Maya writing, those blocks of tiny carved faces and signs, and hear the astonishing story of how, in our own time, they were finally deciphered, so that the ancient kings could speak their own names to us again after more than 1,000 years of silence. We will follow the Maya as they gaze up at the night sky and track the wandering of the planet Venus and predict eclipses and count the days on a calendar of interlocking cycles reaching back millions of years, the work of a people utterly in love with time and with the turning of the heavens. We will watch the sacred ballgame played in its long stone court and enter gently into the strange and powerful world of Maya belief, of the world tree and the watery underworld, and the gods who had to be fed to keep the sun rising and the rain falling. And we will sit at the fire in an ordinary home among the maize fields, where the common people lived their quiet lives beneath the shadow of the temples. And then, gently, we will watch the long ending come, not with a single conqueror at the gates, but with something slower and stranger. A great drought, a rising tide of war, and a mysterious unravelling that emptied the greatest cities one by one, and left them to the returning forest centuries before the first European ever set eyes upon them. And yet, and this is the most important thing of all, the Maya did not vanish. They are with us still, millions of people in those same lands, who speak the old languages and keep the old ways, the living children of the God Kings and the Star Watchers. Theirs is not only a story of a great and mysterious fall, but of an extraordinary endurance. Before we begin, I would love to know where you are tonight. Leave a comment and tell me the name of your town and what time it is where you are as you settle in. There is something quietly lovely in knowing that all around the world, others are lying in the dark, listening to this same old story under so many different skies. And if you would like to drift off like this again tomorrow night, you might gently tap subscribe. That way, each new story will quietly find its own way to you in the dark, without your ever having to go searching for it. But only if these journeys truly bring you rest. There is no need otherwise. Your peace tonight matters far more than any number. So there is nothing left to do now but let the day go. Let your shoulders grow heavy. Let the warmth settle into your hands and your jaw and the space behind your eyes. You do not have to remember any of this. You only have to listen and let the words carry you. Let your breathing slow. Let the sounds of the room drift away. Feel the warm, heavy air of the rainforest at dusk, the green smell of leaf and earth and wood smoke, the calls of the birds growing quiet, the fireflies rising among the great dark trees as the light fades from the temples overhead. We are going back now. Far back. Past the ruins and the silence, to the age when the forest cities blazed with life, and further still, to the first small villages among the maize, and the slow and patient beginning of the lost world of the Maya. Let us begin, as always, with the land, for the land shapes the people, and the world of the Maya was like nowhere else that raised a great civilization. Picture a vast expanse of tropical forest, spreading across the lands we now call Guatemala, Belize, southern Mexico, and beyond. A hot, wet, green world of towering trees and tangled undergrowth, alive with the cries of birds and monkeys, steaming under a heavy sky. It was a world of striking variety. In the south rose cool volcanic highlands, ridged with mountains and dotted with lakes, rich in the black volcanic glass called obsidian and in precious green jade. And to the north spread the low country, the great flat shelf of limestone that is the Yucatan, cloaked in dense rainforest in the south and thinning to drier scrub in the far north. And here was the first great challenge of that land. In much of it, there was almost no water to be seen. The northern lowlands had few rivers and few lakes. The rain, though heavy in its season, sank straight down through the porous limestone and vanished underground. To the eye, it was a land of forest without water, and yet water was there, hidden, if you knew where to find it. For here and there the thin crust of limestone had collapsed, opening deep natural wells down to the water table below. Great round shafts of dark, still water, ringed with dripping green. The Maya called them by a word we render as cenote, and they were the secret lifelines of the dry country, sources of precious water, and, because they seemed to lead down into the earth itself, places of deep and sacred power. So the Maya learned to live with the rhythm of their land, the fierce dry season and the drenching rains, the hidden water and the sudden flood. They cleared patches of the forest to plant their fields and let them grow back and cleared new ones, working always with the green world that pressed in on every side, and that would, in the end, reclaim everything they built. And they did all of it. Every field, every road, every soaring temple, with a startling simplicity of tools. For the Maya had no metal for their work. No iron, no bronze, only stone and wood and bone. They had no wheeled vehicles. They had no horses, no oxen, no beasts of burden of any kind to carry a load or pull a plow. Everything was done by human hands and human backs. Let that sink in, for it makes what follows all the more astonishing. The great pyramids, the carved monuments, the vast plazas paved and gleaming with white plaster. All of it was quarried and shaped and hauled and lifted and set in place by people, using stone tools and rope and raft and sheer patient labor, in the heat and damp of the rainforest. It is one of the great feats of human will and ingenuity anywhere on Earth. Out of this green and demanding world, over long ages, the Maya wove a civilization of dazzling brilliance. Not a single empire under one ruler, but a shifting constellation of many independent kingdoms and cities, each with its own king, its own gods, its own rivalries and alliances, scattered like jewels across the forest. Think of it less as one country than as a whole world of city-states, sharing a common culture, a common writing, a common calendar and set of gods, but forever competing and warring and trading among themselves. Now this city rising to greatness, now that one, across many centuries, beneath the unbroken canopy of the trees. But all of that lay far in the future, when the story begins. For before the great cities and the god-kings, there were only small villages in forest clearings, and patient farmers coaxing life from the difficult soil, and, above all, one small and miraculous plant, without which none of the rest could ever have been. To the very beginning, and to the seed at the heart of it all, we now will go. At the root of the whole Maya world, of the temples and the kings and the star charts and all the rest, lies a single plant. Not gold, not jade, but a tall grass with a heavy golden head of grain. Maize, what many of us call corn. To understand the Maya, you must understand that maize was not merely their food. It was the very center of their world and of their souls. Long, long before the great cities, the ancient peoples of these lands had performed one of the quiet miracles of human history. They had taken a humble wild grass and, over countless generations of patient selection, transformed it into maize, a plant that could feed a civilization. It was a work of genius spread across thousands of years, done by nameless farmers who never knew what they were creating. And maize gave the Maya their daily bread, in a form still eaten across those lands today. the grain soaked and ground into dough and patted flat and baked on a hot stone into the round flatbread we call the tortilla, or boiled into porridge and drink. Day in and day out, season after season, life turned upon the planting, the tending, and the harvest of the sacred grain. So central was maize that the Maya believed the gods had made the first true human beings out of it, that after other failed attempts, the gods at last ground white and yellow maize into meal, and from that dough shaped the flesh of humankind. The people were, quite literally, people of the corn. To grow it and eat it was to take part in something holy. Picture, then, the earliest Maya villages, thousands of years ago. Small clusters of thatched houses in clearings hacked from the forest, the maize fields around them, the smoke of cooking fires, the pole and thatch homes little different from those in which many rural Maya still live today. Simple, quiet, self-sufficient little worlds, scattered through the green. And from these humble beginnings, slowly, the seeds of greatness began to grow. As the farmers grew more skilled, and the harvests more sure, the villages grew larger and closer together, and more connected by trade. Surplus maize could feed people who did not farm, potters and builders and priests, and so, little by little, the first specialists and the first leaders and the first larger centers began to appear. Certain villages, better placed or better led, grew into towns, and the towns began to build. And in this early age, long before the famous classic cities, the Maya raised, deep in the forests of the north, monuments of staggering ambition. Vast platforms and pyramids of stone, some among the largest they would ever build, rising already high above the trees. In one great early city, hidden in the forests of what is now northern Guatemala, the Maya built pyramids so massive that they rank among the largest structures of the entire ancient Americas, raised in this early age when the civilization was still young. It shows us that the genius of the Maya was there almost from the beginning, waiting only for the centuries to bring it to full flower. And then, for reasons not fully clear, some of these earliest great cities faltered and were abandoned, their huge pyramids left to the forest, long before the classic age of the Maya even began. It was a first faint foreshadowing, easy to miss, of the greater unravelling that would come, far in the future, at the very height of Maya glory. But the civilization did not fail. It gathered itself and rose again, greater than before. And so we come to the golden age of the Maya, the classic period, the age of the great god-kings and the soaring temple cities, when the forest world blazed with a light that still astonishes us across the centuries. To the greatest of those cities we now will go. Now the Maya world came into its full and dazzling flower. Across the forests, over the course of centuries, there arose dozens upon dozens of city kingdoms, some small, some vast, each ruled by its own royal dynasty, each raising its own temples and palaces and carved monuments, each competing with its neighbors for glory and power and the favor of the gods. Let us approach the greatest of them, rising from the rainforest of the northern Guatemalan lowlands, a city whose ancient name we can now read from its own inscriptions, and which we know today as Tikal. For many centuries it was among the mightiest of all the Maya kingdoms, its power reaching across the forest, its temples among the tallest structures in all the ancient New World. Come out of the trees in your mind into the great heart of the city and stop and stare. Before you open vast plazas, paved and plastered a brilliant white, dazzling in the sun. Around them rise palaces of many rooms, long and low. And soaring above everything, impossibly steep, climb the great temple pyramids, their stone stairways mounting to little shrines at the summit, crowned with tall ornamental combs of carved stone that lift them even higher into the sky. These temple pyramids are the signature of the Maya, and they are breathtaking. Some rise the height of a modern building of many stories, their stairways so steep they seem almost to stand upright, climbing from the forest floor toward the heavens. They were built up in layers over generations, each king often raising a new temple over the works of his ancestors, so that the pyramids grew, like the dynasties themselves, across the centuries. And a great Maya city was far more than its center. Spreading out from the temples and plazas, in every direction through the forest, lay the sprawling city itself, thousands of homes, from fine plastered houses down to simple thatched huts, gardens and orchards and reservoirs, spreading for miles beneath the canopy. A single great city might hold many tens of thousands of people, a teeming population hidden among the trees. For the Maya had learned to feed such multitudes from the forest itself. They cleared and farmed. They built great reservoirs to hoard the rains through the dry months. They terraced hillsides and drained swamps into raised and fertile fields. The green world that looked, to later eyes, like untouched wilderness was in truth a carefully managed landscape, feeding some of the densest populations of the ancient world. And Tikal was only one star in a whole glittering sky. Far to the north lay its great rival, Calakmul, its match in power and ambition. To the west, in a setting of surpassing beauty, rose Palenque. To the southeast stood Copan, famed for the glory of its carvings. And scores of other kingdoms besides, Yaxcalan, Piedras Negras, Caracol, and many more, each a jewel of the same brilliant civilization. These cities were bound together in a restless web of diplomacy and trade and war. Kings married their daughters into rival dynasties. Ambassadors carried gifts and threats through the forest. Great cities rose to dominate their neighbors, and then were humbled in their turn. It was a world as intricate and as full of intrigue as any in history, all of it recorded, as we shall see, in their own written words. Stand again in the great plaza of Tikal at the height of its glory and fill it, in your mind, with life. The white plaster dazzling, the temples painted in brilliant red and cream, the smoke of incense rising, the crowds gathered in their finery, the drums and the flutes, the king appearing high on the temple stairs in jade and shining feathers. It was a spectacle of color and power such as the forest had never seen. It is almost impossible, standing today among the gray and silent ruins, to picture how vivid and how loud and how alive these places once were. But alive they were, brilliant, crowded, roaring cities of art and faith and power, blazing beneath the tropical sun, for century upon century. The silence we find there now is the silence of an ending. Their true age was one of dazzling noise and light. Let us look more closely, then, at what these people built, at the stone cities themselves, and the astonishing skill without metal or wheel that raised them from the forest floor. For in their architecture, as in everything, the Maya combined a soaring ambition with a patient genius that can still leave us speechless. Everything the Maya built, they built of stone, above all the pale gray limestone that lay everywhere beneath the thin forest soil. It was, in its way, the perfect material, soft enough to be cut and shaped with stone tools when freshly quarried, and hardening as it dried and weathered. And it could be burned to make lime, and the lime made into plaster, the smooth white skin that covered their whole gleaming world. Picture the labor of it. Blocks of limestone cut from quarries with stone tools and wooden wedges, hauled without wheel or draft animal, on rollers and rafts and human shoulders, lifted into place on ramps of earth and rubble, and the whole structure then faced with cut stone and coated thick with brilliant white plaster. A single great temple was the work of years, and of the coordinated effort of a great many hands. At the heart of every Maya city lay its great plazas, broad open courts, paved and plastered a dazzling white, where the people gathered for the ceremonies and the spectacles of the state. Around them the buildings rose in careful arrangement, the temple pyramids reaching for the sky, the long low palaces of many rooms, the platforms for the dances and the rites. The temple pyramids were the Maya's crowning glory, steep-sided mountains of stone, climbing in stages, with a single stairway mounting the front to a small shrine at the very top. To climb one was to rise above the forest canopy into the realm of the sky and the gods. And many were tombs as well as temples, for beneath or within them the Maya often laid their greatest kings, so that the pyramid became a mountain of remembrance rising over the honored dead. The palaces were different, long, low, sprawling ranges of stone rooms, arranged around interior courtyards, where the royal family lived, and the business of the kingdom was conducted, and the treasures were kept. Their rooms were often narrow and dim, for the Maya had not mastered the true arch. Instead they roofed their spaces with the corbel vault. Each course of stone stepped a little inward until the two sides met at the top, like hands leaning together. And they painted it all. The white plaster of the temples and palaces was washed with brilliant color, reds and creams, blues and greens, and covered, in places, with painted scenes and carved and molded ornament. The great masks of gods, the coiling forms of serpents, the intricate glyphs of their writing. A Maya city was not gray, as we find it now, but a riot of dazzling color blazing against the green of the forest. Within some buildings, the Maya painted murals of astonishing beauty and life, scenes of kings and battles, of musicians and processions, of gods and ceremonies, in glowing colors, with a grace and naturalism that rivals the finest painting of the ancient world. Where these survive, sheltered from the centuries, they let us look straight through into the vanished life of the Maya court in all its color and movement. They raised, too, the tall carved stone monuments we call stelae, great upright slabs, set up in the plazas, carved with the portrait of a king in all his finery and covered with the glyphs that told his name, his deeds, and the sacred dates of his reign. A forest of these stone monuments stood in the great plazas, a gallery of god-kings gazing out over their people, frozen in stone. And they built the long stone courts for the sacred ballgame, of which we shall hear more, sunken alleys flanked by sloping walls, where a game that was also a ritual was played with a heavy ball of solid rubber. Every great city had its ball court, often several, set among the temples at the sacred heart of the town. Binding it all together, the Maya laid down great causeways of stone and plaster, raised above the forest floor, running straight as arrows between the temples and plazas, and sometimes for many miles between one city and another. Gleaming white roads through the green, for a people who had no wheel to run upon them, but who valued the straight sacred way between the holy places. All of this, the plazas and the pyramids, the palaces and the painted walls, the stele and the ball courts and the white roads, was raised to serve and to glorify and to house in death a single towering figure at the very center of the Maya world, the divine king. And it is to the god-kings themselves that we now must turn. At the heart of every Maya city stood its king, and to the Maya the king was far more than a ruler. He was a sacred being, a living bridge between the world of human beings and the world of the gods and the ancestors. His title, in their own language, meant something like Holy Lord, and upon his person and his rituals the whole welfare of the kingdom was believed to depend. It was the king who stood at the center of the great ceremonies, high on the temple stairs, in a blaze of jade and shell and the shimmering green plumes of the sacred Quetzal bird. It was the king who communed with the gods and the honored dead on behalf of his people. It was the king whose visions and rituals kept the cosmos in its proper order, the sun rising, the rains coming, the maize growing. He was the still point at the center of the turning world. Each great city was ruled by its own royal dynasty, a line of these holy lords passing the sacred kingship down, most often from father to son, across many generations. The Maya kept careful count of their kings, the founder of the line, and each successor after him, and carved their names and their deeds into the stone, so that the dynasty's story might endure as long as the city itself. And we know their names. This is one of the wonders of the Maya among ancient peoples, that because we can now read their writing, the god-kings are not faceless to us. We know the names of the great lords of Tikal and Palenque and Copan. We know their dates, their mothers and fathers, their triumphs and their defeats. Kings with resounding names, such as the one remembered as Tikal the Great, step out of the stone and become real to us across the centuries. The life of such a king was wrapped in ritual from birth to death. Great ceremonies marked his heir designation, his accession to the throne, the anniversaries of his reign. And chief among his sacred duties was one that seems strange and severe to us, but which lay at the very heart of Maya kingship, the offering of blood. For the Maya believed that the gods had given their own blood to make the world, and that human beings must give blood in return to sustain it. We will come gently to that dark and solemn theme in its place. But understand, for now, that the king's own blood was held most precious of all, and that in the great rites, the Holy Lord himself would draw blood from his own body in offering, so that through his sacrifice and his visions the gods might be nourished and the world kept whole. Kingship for the Maya was not only privilege. it was a heavy and a sacred burden. And when a great king died, he did not simply pass away. He became an ancestor, a powerful spirit watching over his descendants and his city. His body was laid to rest with sumptuous treasures, often deep within a temple pyramid raised to house him, and there his descendants would come to honor him and to seek his guidance, keeping the bond between the living king and the royal dead warm and unbroken across the generations. Picture such a king in life, gazing out from his carved stone monument as he meant to be remembered forever. Standing erect in a towering headdress of quetzal plumes, hung with jade, bearing the sacred emblems of his office, his face grave and serene. Around him, carved deep in the stone, the glyphs proclaim his name and his glory. He is the image of sacred power, meant to endure as long as the stone itself. For that was the God King's deepest hope, to be remembered. Through his monuments, his temples, his carved and painted deeds, he reached out for a kind of immortality, a name that would be spoken and read and honored down all the ages to come. And in a way he never imagined, across a gulf of silence more than 1,000 years wide, that hope has been strangely fulfilled, for we speak his name again today. But to speak their names, we had first to learn to read their words. And the writing of the Maya, those beautiful, baffling blocks of tiny carved faces and signs, is one of the great glories of their civilization and the key that unlocked their whole lost world. To the mystery and the triumph of Maya writing, we now will turn. Of all the achievements of the Maya, none is more remarkable than their writing, for the Maya created the only complete, fully developed writing system ever invented in all of the ancient Americas. While other peoples of the New World kept records in simpler ways, the Maya alone built a true script, able to record every word and sound of their spoken language in all its subtlety and beauty. And it is beautiful. Maya writing is made of glyphs, little blocks, each one a small work of art, packed with tiny carved faces and hands and signs and curling forms, arranged in neat paired columns to be read in a particular winding order. To the untrained eye they seem a riot of grotesque little heads and ornaments. In truth, every curve and every dot is meaning, set down by scribes of extraordinary skill. The system was ingenious and complex. Some glyphs stood for whole words or ideas, a jaguar, a king, a city. Others stood for sounds, for syllables that could be combined to spell out any word at all. And the scribes could often write the same word in several different ways, mixing sound and meaning, plain sign and elaborate portrait, as an artist might, so that no two inscriptions look quite alike. It was writing as high art. The Maya wrote everywhere, carved deep into the stone stelae and the temple stairways and the lintels over the doors, painted on their pottery, modeled in plaster. And they wrote in books, long strips of bark paper, coated with white plaster and folded like a screen, painted with glyphs and pictures in brilliant color. In these books, the priests kept their sacred knowledge. The calendars, the rituals, the movements of the stars, the histories of the gods. But here the story turns dark, for of those countless books, almost none survive. When Europeans came centuries later, they saw in the strange painted books only the work of the devil, and they gathered them up and burned them, thousands upon thousands, in great fires, believing they were destroying idolatry. Of all the libraries of the Maya, only a mere handful of books escaped the flames. It is one of the great losses in the history of human knowledge. And so, for centuries, the Maya writing kept its silence. The books were ashes, the meaning was forgotten, and the glyphs, carved on the ruined monuments deep in the forest, stared out at the few who found them, beautiful, intricate, and utterly unreadable. It seemed the ancient kings would be silent forever, their names and their deeds locked away in signs that no living person could understand. But the glyphs did not stay silent. Over the past century and more, and especially in recent decades, a brilliant and patient labor by scholars from around the world slowly cracked the code. Piece by piece, sign by sign, the syllables were sounded out, the words recovered, the grammar understood, until at last the great breakthrough came, and the writing of the Maya could be read again. It is one of the great intellectual triumphs of our age, and it changed everything. For once the glyphs could be read, the silent stones began to speak. The stelae were not mere decoration, as some had thought. They were history. They named the kings and their parents and their heirs. They recorded accessions and wars and alliances and deaths. A whole lost dynastic history, city by city, came flooding back into the light. Think of the wonder of that moment, repeated 1,000 times across the ruined cities, to stand before a monument that had gazed out, mute, for over 1,000 years, and suddenly to read, in the ancient king's own words, his name, and the day he was born, and the day he took the throne. The god-kings had reached across the centuries for remembrance, and now, at last, we could answer them and speak their names aloud. Here, too, is one of history's quiet ironies. Another great lost civilization, the Indus, far away and long before, left a writing we still cannot read, and so keeps its silence to this day. But the Maya, whose books were burned and whose cities were swallowed by the jungle, have been given their voice back. And the first thing that voice reveals is a people utterly obsessed with one thing above all others, with time. If there is one thing that defined the mind of the Maya, it was their passion for time. No people in all of history have been more devoted to the counting of days, the tracking of cycles, the measuring of the vast reaches of the past and the future. Time for the Maya was not a simple line running from past to future. It was a great machinery of interlocking wheels, sacred and alive, and they were its keepers and its watchers. They kept not one calendar but several, running at once, meshing together like the gears of a great cosmic clock. There was a sacred round of 260 days, woven from two smaller cycles, that governed the rituals and the destinies of each day. And there was a second calendar of 365 days that followed the solar year and the turning of the seasons. These two great wheels turned together, and only after 52 years would a given day return in both at once. That meshing of the two calendars, that 52-year cycle, when the sacred and the solar days came round together again, was a great turning point in Maya life, an age in itself, marked with solemn ceremony. It was, in a sense, their century, the span within which a life was measured, and beyond which the wheels turned on into a new age. But the Maya were not content with cycles of years, or even of lifetimes. They wanted to fix each day precisely in the whole vast sweep of time, and so they devised a third and greater count, what we call the long count, that numbered the days one by one from a fixed beginning point, thousands of years in the past, the mythical dawn of the present world. With this long count, the Maya could pin any event, a king's birth, a battle, a dedication, to an exact day uniquely across enormous spans of time. When they carved a date upon a stela, they often gave its full long count position, the exact number of days since the beginning of the world. It is a system of breathtaking precision, and it lets us date the events of Maya history, from their own records to the very day. And their vision of time reached far beyond even their own history. Their calculations ran back millions of years into the mythic past, and forward into a future almost beyond imagining. They carve dates so vast that they stagger the mind, reckoning in spans of time that dwarf the whole age of their civilization, as though they were peering out across the entire lifespan of the cosmos itself. For to the Maya, time was cyclical and sacred. The great cycles turned and returned. Ages ended and new ages began. The world itself, they believed, had been created and destroyed more than once before the present creation. Each unit of time had its own divine burden, its own God, carried like a load upon the back of the days. To know the count of days was to know the will of the gods and the shape of destiny itself. So the keeping of the calendar was among the most sacred of all tasks, the special knowledge of the priests. In their painted books they recorded the endless meshing of the cycles, the fortunate and the dangerous days, the anniversaries and the prophecies. To consult the calendar before any important act, a marriage, a battle, a planting, a coronation, was simply how the Maya lived, in step with the turning of the sacred wheels of time. There is something profound and something strangely moving in this Maya devotion to time. Here was a people who looked at the days not as we so often do, as a mere ledger to be spent, but as living sacred things, each with its own character and its own God, turning in vast and beautiful cycles that reached from the birth of the world to its unimaginably distant end. They lived inside a cosmos made of time, and their obsession with time drove them to look ever upward, to the source of all the cycles, to the sun and the moon and the wandering planets, the great clocks of the heavens. For the Maya were not only keepers of the calendar. They were astronomers of astonishing skill, watchers of the night sky, who read in the stars the deepest rhythms of their sacred time. And what they saw up there, and what they were able to calculate without a single instrument that we would recognize, is perhaps the most astonishing achievement of all. To the star watchers of the Maya, and to the strange and beautiful mathematics that let them read the heavens, we now will turn. Night after night, across the centuries, the priest astronomers of the Maya watched the sky. From the tops of their temples, from special buildings aligned to the heavens. They tracked the rising and setting of the sun through the year, the phases of the moon, and above all the slow and complex wandering of the planets among the stars. And they wrote down what they saw and found in it a hidden and beautiful order. They were especially devoted to one brilliant object, the planet we call Venus, the dazzling morning and evening star. They followed its long cycle, its appearance as the morning star, its disappearance, its return as the evening star, with such patient care that they could predict its movements far into the future, across cycles of hundreds of years, with remarkable accuracy. To the Maya, Venus was a powerful and dangerous god, and knowing its motions was knowing the will of heaven. They tracked the moon, too, and its cycles, and, most astonishingly, they learned to predict eclipses. By watching and recording, over generations, the long rhythms of the sun and moon, the Maya astronomers worked out the pattern by which eclipses recur, and set down tables that warned of the dangerous days when the sun or moon might be devoured by darkness. To foresee an eclipse, in a world that dreaded them, was power indeed. And they did all of this without any of the instruments we would think essential. No telescope, no clock, no lens of any kind. They had only their own patient eyes, watching from fixed points night after night, year after year. Simple sighting lines between buildings and horizons. And, above all, their extraordinary mathematics and their meticulous records, kept in the painted books across the generations. It was astronomy built of patience and genius alone. For the Maya were master mathematicians, and here they achieved something that eluded even the great civilizations of the Old World for most of their history. The Maya understood and used the concept of zero, a symbol for nothing, for an empty place, one of the most powerful ideas in all of mathematics, which they possessed and used with ease long before it reached most of the world. Their counting was built not on tens, as ours is, but on 20s, a system most likely of fingers and toes. With just 3 simple symbols, a dot for 1, a bar for 5, and a special shell-like sign for 0, they could write any number at all, however vast, stacking the signs in places of increasing value, much as we do with our own digits. It was an elegant, powerful, and beautiful system. And it was this mathematics that made all the rest possible, the vast reaches of the long count, the precise cycles of Venus, the prediction of eclipses. The Maya calculated across enormous spans of time and space with a confidence and an accuracy that can still astonish a modern mathematician. In their bark paper books, columns of dots and bars marched down the pages, tracking the heavens with silent precision. Picture a Maya astronomer priest at his work, on a clear night high above the sleeping city, watching a particular star clear a particular temple against the black sky, marking the day upon his bark paper book, comparing it against the records of those who watched before him, reaching back generations. In his patient vigil, kept up across the centuries, lay a science of the heavens as real, in its way, as any in the ancient world. And they built to hold the sky. Some of their buildings were carefully aligned to the heavens, their doors and windows framing the rising of Venus, or the sun at the solstice, or the setting of a sacred star. At one great northern city stands a curious round tower, quite unlike the rest, that many believe was an observatory. its openings set to catch the movements of the planets across the years. To the Maya, of course, all of this was not what we would call cold science. It was sacred. The heavens were the realm of the gods. The planets were mighty and often dangerous divinities, and to read their movements was to read the intentions of heaven, and to know the fortunate and the fearful days. Their astronomy and their religion were one and the same, a single great effort to understand and to keep in step with the sacred order of the cosmos. And that cosmos, in the Maya imagination, was a place of extraordinary richness and strangeness, a layered universe of heavens and underworlds, of world trees and sacred directions, thronged with gods and spirits and the wandering dead. To enter, gently, into the Maya vision of the universe and the gods is to glimpse one of the most intricate and imaginative spiritual worlds the human mind has ever built. The universe of the Maya was vast and layered and alive in every part. Above stretched the heavens, rank upon rank, the home of the sun and moon and stars and the great sky gods. Below yawned the underworld, a shadowy and watery realm of the dead and the powers of darkness. And between them lay the surface of the earth, where human beings dwelt, the middle world, poised between the powers above and the powers below. At the center of it all, the Maya imagined a great world tree, a mighty sacred ceiba rising through all the layers, its roots deep in the underworld, its trunk in the world of the living, its branches spreading into the heavens. This great tree was the axis of the cosmos, the channel between the worlds. And the king himself, in his rituals, became a kind of living world tree, the human bridge between the realms. And the four directions stood sacred: east and west, north and south, each with its own color and its own gods and its own sacred tree, the corners of the ordered world. The Maya lived within a cosmos of profound and beautiful order, a universe mapped in directions and colors and layers, held together by the world tree at its heart and kept turning by the endless labor of gods and kings. The underworld held a special place in their imagination, a dark and dangerous realm they pictured as a watery, shadowy place of trial and terror, ruled by fearsome gods of death and disease. Its entrance, they believed, lay through caves and through the deep, still waters of the cenotes, which is why those dark natural wells were so sacred and so feared. They were doorways down into the land of the dead. The story of that underworld and of the origins of the world, the Maya told in their great myths, one version of which, from the Highland Maya, has come down to us and is among the treasures of world literature. It tells of the making and unmaking of earlier worlds, of the creation of humankind, at last, from maize, and of a pair of heroic twins who journey down into the underworld and outwit the lords of death and rise again. A story of darkness overcome and life renewed. The Maya gods were many and complex and shifting. Not simple figures, but powers that could be young or old, male or female, kindly or terrible, and that blended and divided in ways that resist any neat telling. There were gods of the sun and the moon, of maize and rain and death, of writing and of war. And chief among the powers most dear to a farming people was the god of rain and storm, upon whose gift of water all life depended. For rain, in that land of hidden water and killing drought, was the difference between life and death, and the rain god was among the most important of all the Maya deities. A figure with great goggled eyes and a long curling snout, appearing again and again on their temples and their books, wielding his lightning axe, pouring out or withholding the precious rain. To honor him and to win his rains was among the deepest concerns of Maya religion. And the gods, the Maya believed, had needs of their own. In the great myth, the gods had shed their own blood and given of themselves to create the world and to make and feed humankind. And so a sacred debt bound the two together. The gods had given life, and human beings, in turn, must give back, must nourish the gods with offerings, with prayer, with incense, and, at the greatest moments, with the precious gift of blood. This is the root of the practice that can seem, to us, the darkest thread in the bright fabric of the Maya world. The offering of blood, and at times of life itself, to sustain the gods and keep the cosmos turning. To the Maya it was neither cruelty nor horror, but sacred duty and cosmic necessity, the paying of a debt owed to the powers that made and fed the world. We will approach it gently and with respect in its place. For now, hold in your mind the beauty and the grandeur of the whole vision. A living cosmos of layered heavens and watery underworld, joined by the great world tree. The four sacred directions with their colors and their gods. The endless cycles of sacred time. The mighty and dangerous divinities of sun and rain and death. And, at the center of it all, the human beings of maize, keeping their covenant with the gods through ritual and offering. It was a vision that touched every part of Maya life. The planting of the fields, the building of the temples, the counting of the days, the wars of the kings, and one strange and sacred game, played with a heavy rubber ball in a long stone court, that was itself a reenactment of the cosmic struggle between life and death. To that ancient ballgame, and to the sacred rites at the heart of the Maya world, we now will turn. In the heart of every great Maya city, among the temples and the palaces, lay a long stone court sunk between two sloping walls, the court of the ballgame. For the Maya, and for the peoples of ancient Central America before and around them, played a game that was far more than a game. A contest that was also a ritual, a sport that echoed the very struggles of the gods, played for the highest stakes imaginable. The ball itself was a marvel, for it was made of rubber, tapped from the sap of a forest tree and cured into a solid, heavy, bouncing sphere, in an age when the rest of the world had never seen such a thing. It was large and surprisingly heavy, and it could strike with real force. And the players were forbidden in the usual game to touch it with their hands or their feet at all. Instead, they struck the heavy ball with their hips, their thighs, their upper arms, driving it back and forth across the court, keeping it in play in a fast and punishing contest that demanded great skill and endurance. To protect themselves against the heavy ball, the players wore thick padding, belts and guards of leather and cloth about the hips and knees and arms, and still the game left its bruises. Picture the court in play, the two teams facing off in the sunken alley, the crowd gathered along the walls above, the heavy ball thudding off hip and stone, the players lunging and diving across the plastered floor, the shouts and the drums echoing off the sloping walls. It was a spectacle of speed and courage and skill, watched by the whole city, wagered upon, and charged with a meaning far deeper than mere sport. For the ball game was sacred. In the great myth of the Maya, the hero twins themselves played the game against the dark lords of the underworld in a contest of life against death, and the game in the stone court was, in some deep sense, a reenactment of that cosmic struggle. To play was to step into the ancient battle between the powers of life and the powers of the dark. The court itself was imagined as a kind of doorway, a seam between the world of the living and the underworld below, a place where the two realms met. The movement of the ball, some believe, echoed the movement of the sun and the heavenly bodies across the sky and down into the darkness. The game was play, and it was also prayer, and it was also a turning of the very machinery of the cosmos. And because it touched the deepest and most dangerous forces, the ball game could carry the gravest of stakes. At times, it seems, the game was bound up with sacrifice, with captured enemy lords, perhaps, made to play a contest they were destined to lose, and then offered to the gods. The carved stone panels along some of the courts show us, in their solemn imagery, that the game and the ritual of sacrifice were, at times, deeply entwined. We should be careful and honest here. Much about the game remains uncertain, and it surely varied from place to place and age to age. Not every game was a matter of life and death. Often, no doubt, it was played for sport, for skill, for the sheer joy of the contest and the roar of the crowd. But at its most solemn, in the great rituals of the state, the ball game carried the full weight of the sacred and of the offerings the gods required. The great ball courts still stand today, in city after ruined city, their sloping walls and long alleys quiet now beneath the forest. In one of the greatest, high on its walls, stand stone rings through which, in the later game, the players may have tried to drive the ball. A feat so difficult that to achieve it, it is said, was a moment of wonder that could end the game outright. Stand in one of those silent courts in the evening, and imagine it filled again. The crowd along the walls, the drums, the heavy ball thudding across the plaster, the players glistening and straining in the sacred contest. The whole city caught up in a game that was also a prayer, a sport that was also the eternal struggle of light against dark, life against death, played out beneath the temples in the heart of the forest. The ball game draws us to the very edge of the deepest and most solemn theme of the Maya world, the sacred offerings, the blood and the ritual, by which they believed the cosmos itself was kept alive. Let us approach it now, gently and with respect, and then turn from the temples to the warm and ordinary firesides where the great mass of the Maya people lived their daily lives. We come now to the most solemn thread in the whole tapestry of the Maya world, one we will handle gently, and without dwelling on its darkness, but which we cannot honestly leave out. For at the heart of Maya religion lay the conviction that the gods, who had given their own blood to make the world, must be repaid in kind, that human beings owed the gods a sacred debt of blood, and that on the paying of that debt the very life of the cosmos depended. The most common offering was the blood of the worshippers themselves, drawn from their own bodies in acts of devotion. In the great rituals, the king and the nobles would draw a little of their own blood as an offering to the gods, a painful and solemn act of piety, given freely, that they believed nourished the divine powers and opened a channel to the world of the spirits and the ancestors. For the Maya believed that in the giving of blood, and in the deep trance of the ritual, a doorway opened, that the ancestors and the gods themselves could be summoned, rising like a vision out of the sacred smoke, to speak with the living. The rites of blood were, to them, above all a means of communion, a way of reaching across the gulf between the human world and the divine, and keeping the two in their proper bond. At the greatest and most solemn moments, and especially in later ages and in times of crisis, the offerings could include human life itself, most often the lives of captives taken in war, high-ranking enemies offered to the gods in the most sacred and public of rites. It is a hard thing for us to contemplate, but to the Maya it was not wanton cruelty. It was the gravest of sacred duties, the paying of the cosmos's own price, performed with awe and solemn ceremony. We will draw the veil gently over the details of these rites, for they are not the stuff of a story told for peaceful sleep. Let us understand only that the Maya lived in a universe they believed to be sustained by sacrifice, that the sun rose and the rain fell and the maize grew, they thought, only because the sacred debt was paid, and that this belief, strange and severe as it seems to us, came from the same deep root as all their art and science, the longing to keep the world in its proper order. Nowhere was this longing more urgent than in the matter of rain. In that land of hidden water and cruel drought, the coming of the rains was quite literally the difference between life and death, and the rain god the most anxiously courted of all the powers. To win his gift, the Maya made their offerings, and above all at the sacred cenotes, those deep dark natural wells that they believed were doorways to the watery underworld where the rain was born. Into the still black water of the greatest sacred cenotes, the Maya cast their most precious offerings, beautiful objects of jade and gold and worked shell, incense, and, in the direst need, more than these, dropping them down into the dark to reach the gods of rain and the underworld below. When, in modern times, the mud at the bottom of one great sacred well was searched, it gave up a treasure of offerings, sunk there across the centuries in the endless human prayer for rain. There is something that reaches across all the strangeness here and touches us, for beneath the unfamiliar rites lies a longing we all know, the desperate hope, in the face of a drought that could starve a whole people, that the heavens might relent, and the rain might come, and the children might be fed. The Maya poured their treasures, and more, into the dark water, out of the oldest and most human of prayers. Please, let it rain. And their religion was not only these solemn and fearful rites. It was woven through the whole of ordinary life, in the small household shrines, the offerings of incense and flowers and food, the honoring of the ancestors buried beneath the very floors of the homes, the prayers at the planting and the harvest, the marking of the sacred days. Faith for the Maya was not a thing apart. It was the very air they breathed, in every field and every hearth. For the great mass of the Maya were not kings or priests or nobles, but farmers, the common people who grew the maize that fed it all, and who lived their lives not in the painted palaces but in humble homes of pole and thatch, among the fields, beneath the shadow of the temples they helped to build. And their quiet, ordinary lives are, in the end, as much the story of the Maya as any god-king carved in stone. So let us leave the temples now, and the solemn rites, and go down among the common people, into the maize fields at the city's edge, and the warm thatched homes and the noisy markets, and spend a little while in the ordinary daily life of the Maya, which in its essentials went on in those same lands almost unchanged for thousands of years. The life of the ordinary Maya turned, above all, upon the field of maize, what they called the milpa. Picture a family's plot at the forest's edge. A patch cleared from the green, the great trees felled and burned, the ash enriching the soil, and there among the stumps the maize planted, poked into the earth with a simple digging stick, and with it beans to climb the cornstalks and squash to spread along the ground. It was a way of farming perfectly suited to the forest and wonderfully wise. The three plants together, maize, beans, and squash, nourishing one another and the soil, giving a balanced and abundant harvest from a single plot. The field would be worked for a few years, then left to return to forest and renew itself, while the family cleared another. It was a patient dance with the green world, worked out over countless generations. Around this labor the whole year turned. There was the felling and burning of the new field in the dry season, the anxious watching of the sky for the first rains, the planting, the long tending against weed and pest and drought, and at last the harvest and the storing of the precious grain. And every stage was wrapped in ritual and prayer, for the growing of the sacred maize was itself a holy act, a partnership with the gods. The Maya home was simple and enduring, a single room most often of poles and mud, with a steep roof of palm thatch shedding the heavy rains, its floor of packed earth, a hearth of 3 stones for the fire. Such houses have been built in those lands for thousands of years, and are built still. Around it might stand a garden and fruit trees, a few turkeys, the family's beehives, the tools of the farm. Within, life was warm and close and simple. At the heart of the home stood the hearth, and at the hearth, the daily labor of the maize. The grain soaked with lime and ground on a stone into dough, and patted into tortillas to bake on the hot griddle, the sound and smell of it filling every Maya home, morning and evening, as it fills them still. Beans and squash, chilies and tomatoes, fruit and game and turkey rounded out the table. The people wove their own cloth, the women working cotton on the simple backstrap loom, a loom tied at one end to a post and at the other around the weaver's own body, so that she leaned back to draw the threads tight. On it they wove cloth of astonishing beauty, patterned and brilliantly colored, each region and town with its own designs, an art still living gloriously among the Maya women of today. And they adorned themselves with care and with meaning. The Maya prized certain marks of beauty strange to us, a flattened forehead shaped gently in infancy, sometimes a slight crossing of the eyes, thought lovely, teeth inlaid with tiny discs of jade. They wore ornaments of shell and bone and, for those who could afford it, precious green jade, and dressed, on festival days, in their finest woven cloth and brilliant feathers. The city drew the people together in its great markets, which were the beating heart of daily life and commerce. Picture the market in full swing. A great open space thronged with people, the goods spread on mats and in stalls, maize and beans and chilies, fish and game and turkeys, cloth and pots and tools, jade and shell and feathers, salt and honey and cacao. The whole busy, noisy, colorful exchange of a great forest city. For the Maya had no coined money as we know it, They traded goods for goods. But certain precious things served as a kind of currency, prized and portable and desired by all fine cotton cloth and greenstone beads, and, above all, the beans of the cacao tree, from which was made the drink of the gods. To be wealthy among the Maya was to be rich in cloth, in jade, and in cacao. So the ordinary life of the Maya, for all the temples that towered over it, was in its essentials a warm and human and enduring thing. The field and the hearth, the loom and the market, the family and the ancestors beneath the floor, the turning of the seasons and the sacred grain. It was a life of real richness and beauty, and among its treasures were things of craft and art that could rival the finest anywhere. To those and to the wider Maya world we turn. The Maya loved beautiful things, and their craftsmen were among the finest of the ancient world. And of all the materials they prized, none was more precious or more sacred than jade, the hard, gleaming green stone that to the Maya meant life itself, and the young maize and the breath, and the very color of the sacred and the royal. To wear jade was to wear a piece of the living, holy heart of the world. And working jade, without any metal tools, was a labor of astonishing patience and skill. The stone is famously hard, harder than steel, and the Maya shaped and carved and polished it using only harder stones, and sand, and reeds, and cord, and endless grinding. From it they made beads and ear flares and pendants, mosaic masks and figurines and the ornaments of kings, objects of a deep, glowing green beauty, buried at last with the great lords in their tombs. And there was another treasure of the Maya, dark and bitter and precious, that they gave in time to the whole world: cacao, the bean from which we make chocolate. To the Maya it was a sacred and a royal thing, the beans used as money and ground and whipped with water and spices into a rich, frothy, bitter drink unsweetened, that was the drink of gods and kings, taken at feasts and in the most sacred of rites. Picture a Maya lord at his feast, served the precious dark drink poured from a height to raise a thick foam, in a beautiful painted cup, a cup that might itself be labeled, in glyphs around its rim, with the very word for cacao and the name of its owner. The love of chocolate that circles the globe today began here, in the forest courts of the Maya, as the sacred luxury of the god-kings. The Maya potters, too, were great artists. They shaped fine vessels of clay and painted them, in glowing colors, with scenes of extraordinary life and grace. Kings on their thrones, gods and heroes, courtiers and musicians, the sacred myths themselves, ringed about with glyphs. These painted vases are among the treasures of Maya art, small windows through which we look straight into the vanished life of the court in all its color. And they were masters of the art of feathers, for the rainforest gave them birds of dazzling plumage, and above all the quetzal, whose long shimmering green tail feathers were among the most precious things in all the Maya world. From these brilliant feathers they made the great headdresses and capes and standards of the kings and the gods' works of shimmering iridescent splendor, of which, being so fragile, almost nothing survives but their images in stone and paint. All of these precious things, the jade and the cacao, the quetzal feathers and the fine cloth, the obsidian and the salt and the painted pots, flowed along the trade routes that bound the Maya world together and reached far beyond it. The Maya were great traders. their merchants ranging by forest path and river and sea-going canoe across enormous distances, carrying the treasures of one region to the markets of another. Great canoes, hollowed from single forest trees, plied the coasts and the rivers, laden with goods. Long-distance merchants, under the protection of their own patron god, led their trains of porters along the forest trails and the white stone roads. Salt from the northern coasts, obsidian from the highlands, jade and quetzal feathers, cacao and cloth and honey, all moved along these arteries, weaving the scattered kingdoms into one great web of exchange. And through this trade, the Maya were connected to the wider world of ancient Central America beyond their own lands, to the great powers of the highlands of central Mexico, far to the west, with whom they exchanged goods and ideas and, at times, something more fateful. The Maya were no isolated forest folk. They were one brilliant civilization among several, linked across the whole of their world by the endless movement of precious things. So we have seen the Maya whole, or nearly so, their land and their cities, their god-kings and their writing, their calendar and their stars, their gods and their games and their daily bread, their jade and their chocolate and their art. Now let us walk among the greatest of their cities themselves, and stand in the places whose ancient names we can now, at last, read again from the stones, and hear the true and human stories of their kings. Let us wander, now, among the greatest of the Maya cities themselves, for each had its own character, its own beauty, its own long story of kings, and thanks to the reading of the glyphs we can now walk among them not as nameless ruins but as places with histories as real and as human as any in the ancient world. We begin where we started, at mighty Tikal, deep in the forests of the northern Guatemalan lowlands. Here rise some of the tallest of all Maya temples, their steep gray combs breaking above the canopy, so high that from the summit of one you look out across an unbroken sea of green to the peaks of the others floating on the horizon. For centuries Tikal was among the greatest powers of the Maya world, its dynasty long, its reach vast. Picture the great heart of Tikal in its glory. The vast plaza, the twin temple pyramids facing one another across it like a gateway to the sky, the acropolis of palaces and the tombs of the ancient kings, the forest of carved stelae standing in the court. To climb its greatest temple is to mount a stone mountain the height of a great modern tower, built stone by a people with no metal and no wheel. Far to the west, in a fold of forested hills above a broad plain, lies Palenque, to many eyes the most beautiful of all the Maya cities. Its buildings are not the tallest, but the most graceful and refined. Airy palaces with a curious tower, temples of delicate proportion, walls once covered in the finest mottled plaster and glyphs. We will return to Palenque and to its greatest king before we are done. To the southeast, near the modern border of Honduras, stands Copan, the city of the sculptors. If Tikal astonishes by its scale and Palenque by its grace, Copan dazzles by its carving. Here the Maya art of sculpture reached its very summit. Stelae carved almost in the round, so deep and so rich that the kings seemed to step living from the stone, and monuments of a complexity and beauty found nowhere else. At Copan rises one of the wonders of the whole Maya world, a great stairway mounting a temple, every one of its many steps carved with glyphs, the longest single inscription the Maya ever made, a stone book of the city's royal history climbing toward the sky. Thousands of glyph blocks, telling the deeds of the dynasty, set into the very stairs, a monument to the Maya passion for the written word and the remembered past. Far to the north of Tikal, hidden in the forests of what is now Mexico, lay its greatest rival, vast Calakmul, one of the largest of all Maya cities, a superpower whose kings styled themselves the lords of a great kingdom, and who for generations struggled with Tikal for mastery of the Maya world. Its enormous pyramids still rise from the forest, and its story, long lost, has now been partly read again from its battered stones. And there were the smaller jewels, no less precious. At Benampak, in a modest temple deep in the forest, the Maya left us the finest paintings that survived from all their world, walls covered, room after room, with murals of astonishing life and color. A great courtly ceremony, musicians and dancers, lords in their finery, a battle and its aftermath. Through them we look, as through a window, straight into a living Maya court. At Yaxcalan, on a great bend of a jungle river, and at Piedras Negras and at Caracol and at 100 other places, the same brilliant civilization raised its temples and carved its stones and told its stories. Each was a world unto itself, and yet all shared the one great culture, the one writing, the one calendar, the one vision of the cosmos, a constellation of kingdoms glittering across the forest. It is worth pausing to feel the sheer richness of it. Not a single monolithic empire, but dozens upon dozens of proud independent kingdoms, each with its centuries of kings, its triumphs and disasters, its alliances and betrayals, all recorded in their own words and now, at last, being read again. The history of the classic Maya is as full and as intricate as the history of ancient Greece with its many warring cities. And like the cities of Greece, the kingdoms of the Maya were bound together as much by rivalry and war as by trade and kinship. To understand the height of their civilization, and, in time, the shadow of its fall, we must look at the great struggles between these forest kingdoms, and above all at the long and fateful rivalry between the two greatest powers of the classic Maya world. For all the peace and order the Maya prized, theirs was not a world without war. The proud kingdoms of the forest competed fiercely for power and prestige, for tribute and captives and the favor of the gods. And their wars, once thought to be small and ritual affairs, we now know from their own inscriptions to have been, at times, great and consequential struggles that shook the whole Maya world. Maya warfare was not the clash of vast standing armies, but something more personal and more sacred. Its highest aim was often not to slaughter, but to capture, to take living, high-ranking prisoners, above all rival lords, whose capture brought immense glory to a king, and who were destined for the most solemn of the sacred rites. A king's greatness was measured, in part, by the noble captives he had taken, whose names he carved beneath his feet. We will not dwell on the fate of those captives, which belong to the solemn and severe world of Maya sacrifice we have already touched. Let us look instead at the great political dramas that the glyphs reveal, the shifting web of alliance and enmity, of dominant cities and their vassals, of ambition and revenge, played out across the forest over centuries, and recorded, blow by blow, in the carved histories of the kings. Long before the height of the Classic Age, a great and distant power reached out of the west and touched the Maya world. Far away, in the highlands of central Mexico, stood one of the greatest cities of the entire ancient Americas. Vast and mighty, its influence radiating across the whole region. And on one fateful day, its warriors or its emissaries arrived at the gates of Tikal, and the history of that city was changed forever. The glyphs record it veiled and solemn. The arrival of strangers from the west, the fall of the old king, the founding of a new line bound to that distant power. For a time, the influence of the great western city lay heavy over the Maya lowlands, and Tikal rose to new heights under its shadow. It is a glimpse of how connected and how turbulent the wider world of the Maya truly was. And then came the long duel that defined the Classic Age. The struggle between Tikal and its great northern rival, Calakmul, for mastery of the Maya world. For generations, these two superpowers contended, each gathering its allies and vassals about it, each seeking to encircle and humble the other. A great forest cold war, flaring now and then into open struggle, that drew in kingdoms across the whole Maya world. There were dark days for mighty Tikal in that long contest. More than once its rivals gained the upper hand. On one grievous occasion, the glyphs tell us, Tikal was defeated and cast down, and for many years fell silent, raising no monuments, while its enemies flourished. It was a hush that must have seemed, at the time, like the end, and yet it was not. For Tikal rose again. After its long defeat, a great king came to its throne, one of the most celebrated in all Maya history, who rebuilt its power, humbled its old enemy in a decisive struggle, and raised the towering temples whose gray combs still crown the forest today. Under him and his line, Tikal blazed to a final, magnificent height, its greatest monuments the fruit of its recovery from the very edge of ruin. These are true histories, remember, not myths, but the real recorded deeds of real kings, recovered from their own stone words after 1,000 years of silence. We can follow the fortunes of Tikal and Calakmul, of Palenque and Copan, across the generations almost year by year. The accessions and the wars, the victories and the humiliations, the marriages and the deaths. It is one of the richest histories to survive from any ancient people. And of all these histories, none is more moving nor better recovered than that of the beautiful western city of Palenque, and of the great king who raised it to its glory, a king whose long-lost tomb, hidden for centuries in the heart of his greatest temple, would become one of the most extraordinary discoveries in the whole story of the Maya. To Palenque and to Tikal the Great we now return. In the west, where the forested hills of Chiapas meet the Great Plain, lies Palenque, graceful, refined, and to many the loveliest of all the Maya cities. Its palace, with its unique square tower, sprawls elegant among the trees. Its temples rise in delicate proportion, and once every surface was covered with the finest mottled plaster, painted in brilliant color, and with glyphs of exquisite beauty. Even in ruin, a serene loveliness clings to Palenque. And Palenque's glory was, above all, the work of one man, a king who came to the throne as a boy, in a time of trouble for his city, and who reigned for the better part of a century, a reign of extraordinary length and brilliance. We know him as Tikal, or Tikal the Great, and under him and his sons Palenque rose from weakness to become one of the jewels of the Maya world, adorned with the beautiful temples and palaces we admire today. Tikal covered his city with inscriptions, long, subtle, learned texts, weaving together the history of his dynasty with the deep myths of the gods and the vast cycles of sacred time, reaching back to the very creation of the world and forward into the distant future. He sought, through these carved words, to bind his own reign into the eternal order of the cosmos, and to secure his memory forever. And forever it has nearly proved. His greatest monument was his own tomb, and its story is one of the marvels of archaeology. In the heart of Palenque, he raised a great stepped temple pyramid, and covered its inner walls with one of the longest of all Maya inscriptions, from which we now call it the Temple of the Inscriptions. For centuries it stood, its secret unsuspected, one temple among many in the ruined city. Then, in the 20th century, an archaeologist noticed something strange. In the floor of the temple at the top, a great stone slab with holes cut in it, as if to lift it. Beneath it, filled with rubble, a hidden stairway plunged down into the heart of the pyramid. It took years to clear, and at the bottom, deep beneath the temple, behind a great triangular stone door, lay a sealed chamber that no one had entered for more than 1,200 years. Within lay a vast carved stone sarcophagus, and upon it a single enormous slab of limestone, carved with one of the masterpieces of all Maya art, the image of the king himself at the moment of his death, poised between the worlds, falling into the open jaws of the underworld while above him rises the great world tree, the promise of rebirth. It is an image of profound beauty and mystery, gazed upon now by people from all over the earth. And within the sarcophagus lay the king. Tikal himself, laid to rest more than 13 centuries before, his face covered with a mask of glued jade mosaic, his body heaped with jade, rings and beads and ear flares, a jade bead placed in his hand and another in his mouth, the precious green stone of life surrounding him in death. After all the centuries, the great king lay revealed, in the heart of the mountain he had built to house him. Think of the wonder of that discovery, to descend that hidden stair into the dark, and to come, at the bottom, face to face with a great king of a vanished civilization, lying just as his mourners had left him more than 1,000 years before, surrounded by the glowing green jade he had loved. It is one of the closest encounters we have ever had with the ancient Maya, a moment of communion across an immense gulf of time. And because we can read the glyphs, Tikal is no faceless figure to us. We know his name and the day of his birth and the day of his accession as a boy and the long years of his reign and the day of his death in great old age. We know his mother, a powerful queen, and his sons who ruled after him. He reached across the centuries for remembrance, and, through the stones and the recovered words, he has found it. Palenque, under Tikal and his line, marks one of the summits of Maya civilization. Its art, its architecture, its writing, its learning all at their height. And across the whole Maya world, In these same generations, the classic civilization was blazing to its zenith. But at the very height of that glory unseen, the forces were already gathering that would, within a few short generations, bring the whole shining world of the forest cities to its end. Let us pause at the summit of the classic Maya before the long descent begins and take in the full height of what they achieved. And there is no better place to do so than at Copan, the city of the sculptors in the far southeast of the Maya world, where the art of the Maya reached a perfection found nowhere else. At Copan, the Maya carved as if the stone were alive. Their stelae are not the flat, shallow portraits of other cities, but figures carved almost fully in the round, deep and rich and intricate, the kings standing forth in overwhelming detail. Every bead of the jade, every plume of the headdress, every glyph and emblem rendered with a mastery that still astonishes the eye. It is sculpture to rank with the finest of any ancient civilization. Here, 2 rows that wonder, we have glimpsed the great hieroglyphic stairway, a temple stairway of many dozens of steps, every one carved with glyphs, more than 2,000 blocks in all, telling the long story of Copan's dynasty as it climbs toward the temple at the summit. It is the single longest Maya text that survives, a whole history written into a staircase, a monument to a people in love with the written word. And Copan's kings were learned as well as mighty. Their monuments record their fascination with the calendar and the heavens, a great gathering of astronomer priests, it seems, may have met here to refine their reckoning of time. In the carvings and the inscriptions of Copan, the whole genius of the Maya, their art, their writing, their science, their kingship, comes together in a single dazzling flowering. Stand, then, in the great plaza of Copan at the height of the classic age, and turn slowly around. The deep-carved stelae of the kings standing in the court like living lords, the great stairway climbing glyph upon glyph into the temple, the ball court, one of the most beautiful in all the Maya world, the whole city ablaze with color and carving beneath the forested hills. This was the Maya at their very summit. And this summit was reached, remember, across the whole vast forest world at once. At Tikal and Calakmul and Palenque and Copan and 100 cities more, each raising its temples, carving its stones, recording its kings in these same few golden generations. Never had the Maya been so numerous, so wealthy, so accomplished, so proud. The forest had never held so many people, nor blazed with so much art and light. The population of the Maya lowlands swelled to its greatest height in these years, millions of people, filling the cities and the countryside, working every scrap of usable land, feeding the great cities and their god-kings and their endless building. It was a civilization at the very peak of its powers, and it must have seemed, to those who lived in it, that the temples would rise, and the kings would reign, and the sacred order would turn, forever. But a civilization at its very height is also, sometimes, a civilization stretched to its very limits. Its lands worked to exhaustion, its people crowded to the edge of what the forest can bear, its whole vast and intricate order balanced on a knife's edge, needing only a hard push to send it toppling. And such a push, unseen and unimaginable to the proud kings in their painted palaces, was already on its way. For in the great plazas, if we read the dates upon the stelae, we can watch, with a kind of dread, the story approach its turn. the monuments rise thick and glorious through the height of the classic age, and then, city by city, in the space of a few short generations, they begin to falter and to thin and at last to cease. To that long, strange, and still debated ending, the fall of the classic Maya, we now gently must come. For centuries the classic Maya had flourished, their cities blazing across the forest, their kings raising ever taller temples and ever prouder monuments. And then, at the very height of that glory, something began to go wrong. The change came gradually, unevenly, city by city, but over the span of a few generations, the whole brilliant civilization of the southern forests slid into a decline from which it would never recover. As always with the great endings of history, we must be honest. There was no single cause, no one dramatic blow, and scholars still debate the tangle of reasons to this day. But the picture that emerges is of a civilization that had grown, in its very success, dangerously overstretched, and that was then struck by a series of blows, from the sky and from within, that together were more than even the Maya could withstand. Consider first their very greatness. The population of the Maya lowlands had swelled, over the centuries, to enormous numbers, more people, perhaps, than that forest land could truly sustain. Every scrap of usable ground was worked. The forests were cut back for fields and for the endless fires needed to burn lime for plaster. The soils, under such relentless use, may have begun to wash away and to fail. The land was being pushed to its very limits. Picture the forest around the great cities growing thinner with the generations, the hillsides stripped and eroding, the once rich soils growing tired, the effort to feed the vast population growing harder year by year. It was a slow, creeping strain, invisible from one season to the next, but real. A civilization pressing against the outer edge of what its world could bear, with less and less margin left for any misfortune. And upon this overstretched world, it seems, fell a great and terrible misfortune, drought. The evidence, gathered from the mud of lakes and the stone of caves, points to a series of severe droughts striking the Maya lowlands in these very generations. Dry years piling upon dry years, the rains failing, the reservoirs sinking, the maize withering in the fields, in a land that had always lived on the knife edge of water. For a civilization built in a country of hidden water, wholly dependent on the yearly rains and the water it could hoard, a great and lasting drought was a blow at the very heart of life. The reservoirs that fed the cities through the dry season could not fill. The crops that fed the multitudes could not grow. And there was no great river to fall back on, no other water to be had. The sky itself had turned against them. And as the droughts bit, and the harvests failed, and hunger spread, the strains upon Maya society must have grown unbearable. We see, in these years, the signs of rising warfare, more conflict, more desperate struggle, as the kingdoms fought over the shrinking harvests and the dwindling land. Some cities show signs of hasty defensive walls thrown up, of a world grown suddenly more dangerous and afraid. And there may have been a deeper crisis still, a crisis of faith. For the whole authority of the god-kings rested on a sacred promise, that through their rituals and their sacrifices, they kept the cosmos in order and brought the rains and the harvests. But what happens to that promise when the rains do not come, year after year, however faithfully the rites are performed? The failure of the rains was not only a disaster of the fields. It was a failure of the kings and of the gods themselves. Imagine the slow crumbling of that ancient trust, the people looking to the temples for the rains that did not fall, to the god-kings for the deliverance that did not come, and finding, at last, that the sacred order in which they had placed their whole faith could not save them. When a people ceases to believe that its rulers can hold back the darkness, the deepest foundation of all is gone. So it was not one blow but many, falling together upon a civilization already stretched to its limit. Too many people, exhausted land, a merciless drought, spreading warfare, and a failing faith in the kings and the gods who could no longer keep their sacred promise. Any one of these the Maya might have weathered. All of them together, striking at once, were too much. And so, across the southern lowlands, the very heartland of the classic Maya, the country of Tikal and Palenque and Copan, the great unravelling began. It did not come everywhere at once. It rolled across the land over the better part of a century, city by city. But once it began, it did not stop. And we can trace its coming, with a strange and mournful precision, in the silence that fell one by one upon the carved stones. Remember how the Maya loved to carve the dates upon their monuments, how each great stela recorded, in the long count, the exact day of its raising. This gives us an extraordinary and a haunting gift. We can watch the collapse happen, city by city, simply by reading the last dates the Maya ever carved. For as each kingdom failed, its stream of monuments slowed and faltered, and then, on some final date, stopped forever. Through the height of the classic age, the dated monuments come thick and glorious year upon year, city upon city. And then, as the troubles gather, we watch them thin. Here a city carves its last stela and falls silent. There another follows a few years on. The proud record of the god-kings, unbroken for centuries, begins to break off, kingdom by kingdom, like lamps going out across a darkening land. At Copan, the city of the sculptors, the great tradition of carving falters and fails. The last monuments are raised, and then no more. At Palenque, the beautiful western city, the inscriptions cease. No more kings record their reigns. At Tikal, mightiest of all, the towering temples receive their last dedications. The final stelae are raised in the great plaza, and then, upon the proud dynasty that had endured for 6 centuries and more, the silence falls. One by one, over the decades, the lamps went out. The carving of monuments ceased. The building of temples stopped, the great works left unfinished. The keeping of the long count that had numbered the days for 1,000 years was let go. The whole apparatus of the god-kings, the writing, the calendar, the sacred kingship itself, quietly wound down and ended, across the southern forests, within the span of a few generations. And the people? Here the truth is at its most sobering. For the collapse was not only the fall of kings and the end of monuments. It seems, a catastrophe for the population itself. Across the southern lowlands, over these generations, the great multitudes that had filled the cities and the countryside dwindled away, through hunger, through hardship, through the scattering of a broken people. The heartland of the classic Maya emptied of most of its human life. Some died in the hard years of drought and war and hunger, that we cannot soften, though we need not dwell upon it. And many surely simply left, abandoning the failing cities and the exhausted land, drifting away in search of somewhere the rain still fell and life was still possible, carrying what they could, turning their backs on the temples of their ancestors and walking out into the forest. Picture the great cities in their final days, the plazas cracking, weeds pushing up between the paving stones, the palaces half empty, the courts fallen quiet, a dwindling remnant of people camping among the crumbling monuments of a glory they could no longer sustain, the smoke of fewer and fewer cooking fires rising over the once teeming city. The light was going out of the Maya world, not in a night, but across a long and mournful dusk. And then, at last, the final families gathered what they had and walked away, and left the great cities to the silence and the forest. No one carved a last stela to mark the ending. There was no one left to carve it. The temples stood empty under the sky, the plazas lay bare, and the green world that the Maya had held back for 1,000 years began, at last, to flow back in over everything. The forest is patient, and it is relentless. Seeds took root in the cracks of the plaster. Vines climbed the temple stairs. The great trees rose in the plazas and thrust their roots into the walls. Year by year, century by century, the jungle swallowed the cities of the Maya, wrapping the pyramids in green, pulling down the palaces, burying the carved stones, until the works of a great civilization became, once more, only wooded hills beneath the endless canopy. And so the heartland fell silent, and the forest closed over it, and the greatest cities of the classic Maya passed into a long sleep. But this was not, we must be clear, the end of the Maya themselves. For even as the southern cities died, the story was shifting northward, and in another part of the Maya world, a new and brilliant chapter was even then beginning. For the Maya world was vast, and the great collapse, terrible as it was, fell most heavily upon one part of it, the southern lowland forests, the old classic heartland. But to the north, across the flat scrub of the Yucatan Peninsula, the Maya not only endured, for a time they flourished and raised new cities as brilliant in their way as any that had fallen. Greatest among these was Chichen Itza, in the north of the Yucatan, a city that rose to its height in the very centuries when the southern cities were dying, and that became one of the largest and most powerful of all Maya centers. Its great pyramid still stands, one of the most famous ancient buildings in all the Americas. A perfect stepped mountain of stone, its stairways so devised that at the turning of the seasons a shadow serpent seems to ripple down its side. At Chichen Itza the Maya raised wonders. The mighty pyramid, a ball court so vast it dwarfs all others, its walls carved with the solemn imagery of the sacred game. A round tower, set with openings to track the wandering of the stars. Great colonnades and temples, and, at the city's edge, a huge and sacred cenote, a great dark well of still water, into which, across the centuries, the Maya cast their precious offerings and their prayers for rain. The northern cities show us new influences, new styles, new connections with the wider world of ancient Mexico beyond the Maya lands. A Maya civilization still living, still changing, still creating, long after the southern heartland had fallen silent. For a few more centuries, the light burned on in the north, at Chichen Itza and, later, at other cities, keeping the old civilization alive beneath a changing sky. In time, the northern cities, too, saw their troubles, their own rivalries and declines, their own great centers rising and falling. By the time the first Europeans reached these shores, the age of the great Maya cities was long over, in the north as in the south. The people lived now in smaller towns and villages, ruled by lesser lords. The memory of the god-kings faded into legend. But the Maya themselves were very much alive. For this is the truth that must stand at the center of any honest telling. The Maya did not vanish. Their great classic cities fell, and the forests took them. But the people endured in the north, in the highlands, in 1,000 villages among the fields, speaking their languages, growing their maize, keeping their calendars and their gods, weaving their cloth, living the deep and ancient rhythms of Maya life, unbroken generation upon generation. And then, 5 centuries ago, a new and shattering trial came upon them. Strangers arrived from across the sea. To the fate that the coming of the Europeans brought to the Maya, the conquest, the suffering, the burning of the books, we must turn gently, for it is part of the story. But even that, terrible as it was, did not end them, and their endurance through it is among the most remarkable chapters of all. The strangers came with steel and with horses and with unfamiliar diseases against which the Maya had no defense, and against which, more than any weapon, whole peoples of the Americas would fall. The conquest of the Maya was long and hard and bitter, for, having no single empire to topple, no one great king to capture, the many Maya kingdoms had to be subdued one by one, and some held out, deep in the forest, for a very long time. And with the conquest came, as we have heard, one of the great tragedies for human knowledge, the gathering and burning of the Maya books, those precious painted screenfolds in which so much of their learning and their history was kept, consigned to the flames as the work of the devil until almost none remained. In a few great fires, whole libraries of a civilization's memory were lost forever, and the voices of the Maya were, for centuries, all but silenced. And yet, even through conquest and loss, and the long hard centuries that followed, the Maya endured. They kept their languages, and their weaving, and their maize, and their reverence for the old sacred things, blending the new faith with the deep old ways, surviving every hardship, refusing to disappear. The children of the god-kings are with us still, in their millions, to this very day, which is why the rediscovery of their ancient glory is not the finding of a dead people, but the homecoming of a living one. For centuries, then, the great classic cities lay lost beneath the jungle, their existence unknown to the wider world, their very names forgotten, remembered dimly, if at all only in the tales of the local Maya, whose ancestors had raised them. The pyramids stood wrapped in green, the carved stones sank into the leaf mold, and the forest kept its enormous secret beneath the unbroken canopy. And then, in the earlier part of the 19th century, the outside world at last came to the ruins, and the way it happened is one of the great romances of exploration. For word had reached the wider world of strange ruined cities hidden in the forests of Central America, and two remarkable men set out, through hardship and fever and the trackless jungle, to find them and to tell the world what they had seen. One was a traveler and writer of rare gifts, the other an artist of extraordinary skill and patience. Together they pushed into the forests and were guided to ruin after overgrown ruin, great cities strangled in jungle, their temples buried in green, their carved monuments lying broken among the roots. And they did what no one had done before. They described these places truly and drew them faithfully and carried the wonder of them back to an astonished world. The artist's beautiful, meticulous engravings and the writer's vivid accounts struck the world like a revelation. Here, in the forests of the Americas, were the ruins of a great and unknown civilization, cities of stone temples and carved monuments and mysterious writing, as grand in their way as any of the old world and utterly unsuspected. The lost cities of the Maya stepped, at last, out of the forest and into the knowledge of the world. And a great question rose with them: who had built these places? For a long time, some in the wider world could scarcely believe that the ancestors of the local Maya farmers had raised such wonders, and spun all manner of fantastical theories. Lost tribes, distant civilizations, anyone but the Maya themselves. It was a failure of imagination and of respect, and it would take the reading of the glyphs in time to prove beyond doubt what should never have been in question, that the Maya had built the cities of the Maya. For as we have heard, the greatest discovery of all was still to come, not in the forest, but in the long patient labor of the scholars who, over the following century and more, slowly learned to read the ancient writing. And as the glyphs gave up their secrets, the silent ruins were transformed. No longer mysterious and anonymous, but named cities with known kings and dated histories, their stones speaking again in the voices of the long-dead lords. And so the Maya were given back not only their cities, but their history and their voice. Today we can walk through Tikal and Palenque and Copan and read, upon the very stones, the names and deeds of the kings who built them. We can trace their dynasties and their wars across the centuries. We can know them, these ancient people of the forest, more fully than we know almost any other civilization of the deep past. And the cities themselves have been, in part, called back from the forest, cleared and studied and cared for, their temples rising once more above the trees, visited now by people from every corner of the earth, who climb the ancient stairways and stand in the great plazas and feel, in that green and haunted stillness, the presence of the vanished god-kings. Yet the forest still holds its secrets. Even now, hidden beneath the canopy, lie countless Maya sites never yet explored, whole cities, still swallowed in green, waiting. In recent years, new eyes in the sky, able to see through the forest cover, have revealed that the Maya world was even vaster and more densely built than anyone had dreamed. Thousands upon thousands of structures, whole landscapes of ancient settlement, hidden all this time beneath the trees. So the story of the Maya is not finished even now. The forest still guards its lost cities. The scholars still read new secrets from the stones. And the living Maya still keep the old ways in the lands their ancestors made great. What began as a tale of a mysterious and vanished people has become something richer and truer. The recovery, still going on, of one of the most brilliant civilizations the world has ever known. Let us gather up, then, in the quiet, all that this remarkable people gave to the world. For it is a great deal, and much of it endures. They built, without metal or wheel or beast of burden, some of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world, their temples still rising in wonder above the forest after more than 1,000 years. They created the only complete writing system ever invented in the ancient Americas, a script of great beauty and subtlety, able to record their language in full, and with it they wrote a true history, so that we know the names and deeds of their kings as we know those of few ancient peoples. And though their books were burned, the stones remembered, and the scholars have learned to read them, and the ancient voices speak again. They were mathematicians who grasped and used the profound idea of zero, astronomers who tracked the planets and predicted eclipses with only their patient eyes and their brilliant reckoning, and keepers of time so devoted that they built calendars of breathtaking precision and reach, numbering the days across millions of years. In their passion for time and the heavens, they achieved a science that still commands our wonder. They gave the world chocolate, the cacao they held sacred, the drink of their gods and kings, now beloved across the whole earth. They wove cloth of surpassing beauty, and carved jade with matchless patience, and painted vases and walls with a grace that ranks among the finest art of any ancient people. And all of it grew from the forest, and from the sacred maize, and from the genius of a people who made a brilliant civilization in one of the most demanding lands on earth. And they gave us, too, one of history's most haunting and instructive stories, the story of a great civilization that pressed too hard upon its world and was struck by a changing climate and could not hold. There is a warning in the fall of the Maya for any people that grows great and forgets the limits of the land that feeds it, and there is a strange comfort, too, in knowing that even so great a fall was not the end. For the deepest lesson of the Maya is their endurance. They fell, and the forest took their cities. They were conquered, and their books were burned, and still they did not vanish. Still, today, more than 6 million of them keep the old languages and the old ways alive, in the same lands their ancestors made great. A living civilization, unbroken from the age of the god-kings to our own. So when we stand among the ruins of Tikal or Palenque, we are not standing in a graveyard of a dead people, as we might among the tombs of some vanished race. We are standing in the ancestral cities of a people who are still here, whose descendants still speak the words carved on these stones, still count by the old calendar, still hold sacred the maize and the mountains and the turning of the days. There is a deep and quiet beauty in that thought. The god-kings sought immortality, and carved their names in stone in the hope of being remembered forever. And in a way they never imagined, that hope has been fulfilled, not only in the stones that speak their names again, but in the living blood of their descendants, who carry the Maya story on, unbroken, into a future the ancient kings could never have dreamed. The temples fell silent. The forest closed over them. the books burned, the great cities emptied and were lost. And yet the Maya endure, and their voice has been recovered, and their wonders stand again above the trees. It is, in the end, not a story of vanishing at all, but of the astonishing persistence of a great and brilliant people through every hardship the centuries could bring. And so we come to the end of our long journey through the lost and living world of the Maya, through their green land and their soaring cities, their god-kings and their glyphs, their calendars and their stars, their gods and their sacred games, their fall into the forest and their unbroken endurance to this day. There remains only to let it all settle, gently, into the quiet, as you drift towards sleep. Let the great cities rise once more in your mind, one last time, in all their vanished glory, Tikal's temples breaking above the endless green, graceful Palenque in its forested hills, Copan ablaze with its deep carved stone, vast Calakmul and mighty Chichen Itza, the white plaster dazzling, the paint glowing red and blue, the god-kings appearing in jade and shimmering feathers before their gathered people, beneath the tropical sun. Let the sounds return softly, the drums and the flutes in the great plazas, the thud of the heavy ball in the sunken court, the murmur of the crowded markets, the chant of the priests upon the temple stairs, the calls of the birds in the surrounding forest, the whole warm, teeming, brilliant life of the forest cities, blazing for 1,000 years beneath the canopy of the trees. And now let it all grow quiet again, gently, as the centuries settle over it like falling leaves. The crowds thin, and the drums fall silent, and the plazas empty. The forest steals in, soft and green, over the plaster and the stone. The vines climb the temple stairs, and the great trees rise in the courts, and the pale pyramids sink slowly into a sea of leaves, wrapped in green and shadow and a deep and peaceful stillness. Rest there now, in the quiet of the forest that has grown over the sleeping cities. The air is warm and heavy and full of the green smell of leaf and earth. The fireflies drift among the dark trees. The howler monkeys have gone still. The birds have settled to roost, and high above, through the gaps in the canopy, the great stars of the tropical sky will slowly over the temples, keeping their ancient count of the turning nights. The god-kings sleep in their pyramids. The carved stones keep their patient watch. The forest holds it all in its deep green embrace. And far off, in the villages among the maize, the living Maya sleep too, beneath the same stars, the old languages and the old ways safe in their keeping, the long story carried on into another dawn. All is well. All is at rest. The lost cities are not lost, and the vanished people have not vanished, and the night is deep and kind. So let your breathing slow, and let the last of the day dissolve into the warm green dark. There is nothing left to do, and nowhere to be, and nothing to remember. The forest keeps its ancient watch, as it has for 1,000 years, and will keep it still until the morning. And yet, though the great cities sleep beneath the trees, the story they belong to is not, in the end, a story of ending at all. And so the great cities sleep on beneath the forest, their temples gray and silent above the green. But do not let anyone tell you that the Maya are a lost people or a vanished race. for they are not gone at all. In the highlands of Guatemala and the forests of Mexico, in Belize and Honduras, more than 6 million people still speak the Mayan tongues today, the living descendants of the god kings and the star watchers, keeping the old languages, the old weaving, the old reverence for the maize and the mountains and the turning of the days. And the silence of the stones themselves has, in our own time, been broken. Where once the beautiful glyphs stared back at us, mute and unreadable now, after a long and brilliant labor of decipherment, the ancient kings can speak again. We can read their names and the names of their cities, and the days of their births and their victories and their deaths. A whole lost history, thought gone forever, has come flooding back into words. The Maya, unlike so many ancient peoples, have been given back their own voice. That perhaps is the deepest wonder of their story. They gave the world a written language and a mathematics with a zero and a calendar of breathtaking reach and cities that still take the breath away. And then they let those cities go and endured and carried their languages and their memory down through every hardship of the centuries, unbroken into the present day. The temples fell silent. The forest closed over them, and still the people and the words and the count of days went on. But all of that can wait for the morning. There is nothing left for you to do tonight. The great forest is dark and warm and murmuring now. The pale temples cool beneath a sky thick with stars, and the long journey of this story has finally come to rest. So let your breathing slow, and let the last of the day dissolve. Sleep now and sleep deeply. The old stone cities will keep their quiet watch beneath the trees, as they have for 1,000 years, and another gentle story will be waiting for you, whenever you are ready to listen again. Good night.